We stand today at a place of battle, one that 40 years ago saw and felt the worst of war. Men bled and died here for a few feet of, or inches, of sand as bullets and shell fire cut through their ranks. About them, General Omar Bradley later said, "Every man who set foot on Omaha Beach that day was a hero." No speech can adequately portray their suffering, their sacrifice, their heroism. President Lincoln once reminded us that through their deeds, the dead of battle have spoken more eloquently for themselves than any of the living ever could, that we can only honor them by rededicating ourselves to the cause for which they gave a last full measure of devotion.
In 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany and quickly established a dictatorship built on intimidation, persecution, and dictatorial rule. In 1938, Hitler's army marched into Austria, moved on to take a part of Czechoslovakia, and in September 1939 began their conquest to invade the rest of Europe. From 1942 to 1944, the Allied countries managed to slow the progression of the Axis forces. They were defeated in North Africa, Italy, and Eastern Europe. Soon, another front would be opened in the western part of Europe. On June 6, 1944, the Allied powers initiated sea and airborne landings along the Normandy coast in one of the largest amphibious operations in history, marking the start of the liberation of northwestern Europe. In total, 5 beaches were selected for the seaborne landings. The American troops were to take and hold the 2 westernmost beaches. On June 6th, the mental and physical strength of every man landing on Omaha would be tested. This beach proved to be a living nightmare, an unforgettable baptism of fire that rained down upon the untested troops, many of whom were experiencing combat for the very first time. 3 young men by the name of Ned Elder, Walter Geldon, and Leo Balon would be part of the Allied Expeditionary Force landing with the first waves on Omaha Beach. These brave young men said goodbye to their families and friends and set off to fight for a noble cause. They had no idea they were carrying the future of the free world on their young shoulders.
At 06:36, right at the crack of dawn, 6 landing craft under the command of Royal Navy Sub-Lieutenant Jimmy Green headed for the Dog Green sector of Omaha Beach. Smack in the middle of that sector is D1 Veerville Draw. Veerville Draw, and that term draw only means roads that left the beach area up into the bluff, exits off the beach.
The most westerly draw off Omaha Beach was D1. It was located about 6 miles east of the German gun battery at Pointe du Hoc, which was successfully captured by the 2nd Ranger Battalion. D1 was the objective of Company A of the 116th Infantry Regiment. Upon landing, they were to take the draw and move inland 600 yards to the small village of Velville-sur-Mer. Pinned down under a hail of gunfire and explosions, the brave young men from A Company were unable to move off the beach, and within minutes of their landing, they were completely decimated.
D1 was estimated to be the most heavily defended by the German forces because D1 of the 5 roads off the beach was the only one paved.
A close look at the history of A Company of the 116th Infantry Regiment brings a heartbreaking truth into focus. Nearly all the men from that company lost their lives on June 6, 1944, paying the ultimate price in the hope of freedom. However, there were 2 commanding officers that managed to survive this deadly day, Lieutenant Ray Nance and Lieutenant Edward Geary, both from Virginia. As part of the second wave, Lieutenant Nant was loaded onto Landing Craft Number 7 and landed with B Company of the 116th. As soon as Lieutenant Nant stepped foot on the beach, he quickly realized that a large part of his company, A Company of the 116th, had been almost completely wiped out.
When Company A made the approach to Dog Green Sector, we were met with heavy artillery and mortar fire. When the ramp went down, the men trying to get to the beach were shot at by every kind of enemy fire. Not from a poorly trained platoon, as we were told, but from a heavily reinforced beach defense force of the 352nd Infantry Division. My boat, Boat 7, had 17 men on board. No demolitions or any other heavy equipment. I stepped on the ramp and jumped into the water, which was waist deep. The other men were to follow. I waded through the water and went up on the beach about 15 yards, dropped on the sand and looked back. I didn't see anyone behind me, and there was no one in front of me. It seemed that no one had been there before us. Where were Company A and the DD tanks? Enemy fire was heavy and deadly, consisting of small arms and machine guns which delivered direct and inline fire. The mortars and artillery were very accurate. Ahead of me, there were nearly 300 yards of sand up to the high water mark. The beach was covered with obstacles of wood and steel. There was not one bomb crater. I continued crawling toward the shore. My men began to show up to the right and to the left. Heavy automatic fire was coming from our right front and well up the hillside. I was still crawling along on my stomach. From what I observed, it was suicide to stand. It was 10:30 a.m., and the tide had come in and was at our feet. We had been on the beach for more than 3 hours. This is when I saw what happened to Company A. The dead drifted in with the tide. There were so many bodies in the water that were touching at times. They were right behind us, at our feet, moving back and forth with the tide.
I heard about my Uncle Leo when I was a child. I just remember my mother telling me that she had another brother, but he had passed away in the war.
So Leo was one of 9 children. He was born in 1924, and he was drafted when he was 18 to go to the Army. And as far as I know from records of what came in from family members, that he had written letters at home, to home, and he didn't make it out. So it's sad.
My daughter did a lot of investigating on Ancestry.com, and she came across a lot of information from that regarding my Uncle Leo, and she would contact me and let me know what she had found. And it was very exciting for me too, because I was learning a lot.
So in 2008, I started with researching, and I found the documents about about his grave and all that, and it was about 4 a.m, and I was so excited to find this stuff, and I didn't know what to do, but I wanted to tell my mom about it. And I knew later on that day that I was going to be seeing my grandmother and wanted to show her, but it was very exciting to find this information. So I wound up taking my computer to my brother's house, and later on that day, it was New Year's Eve, we were supposed to be celebrating that, and I showed her the information. So wanted to get more information about it. So basically when I brought it over there, I showed it to her, and she became very, very, very quiet, and I didn't understand, but she started to express a memory that she had at the time, that she remembers, she was quiet for a little while, but then she remembered that they were all sitting at the kitchen table before he was supposed to leave, and he was crying that he didn't want to go. She remembers teardrops falling into his coffee. So I wasn't sure really what to do. It was kind of that moment where, you asked too much and you went too far. So it just later on the next day, I asked my mom and was like, was that okay to ask her that? And she expressed how sensitive that people can get about that stuff.
In 1945, when the war ended in Europe and in the Pacific, millions of Allied soldiers, sailors, and airmen were coming home after being overseas for several years. Thousands of families had lost their loved ones in the fighting to liberate the newly freed Europe. Many of the veterans of the Second World War who endured terrible combat were now trying to move on with their lives and put the war behind them while looking towards a peaceful future. These families and veterans rarely talked about the past or the war. It was just too painful for them.
No one ever talked about it. But the nieces and nephews, being the next generation down and still with us, wanting their uncles' legacies protected, documented for educational purposes going forward, we saw a tremendous shift of previous generation sorrow to one of enlightenment and happiness.
And I know how my mother could be talking about difficult things, so I understand when Katie said that she listened to what Katie had to say, but she was very quiet about it. I think that played a lot into it. I think she was very quiet because it was too painful. I think as a child I realized how sensitive of a subject it was, so I didn't probe very deeply with it. But it's exciting now to see and learn all of the things that are being uncovered.
It was probably about 2012 that I was starting to revisit this part of my history, and came across a man that was in Pennsylvania named Frank, and he was looking for the same information that I was. He commented on findagrave.com. Yannick had come into play, and he had commented on the same photo that we were originally starting on, saying that he sponsors Leo's grave, and it was exciting. Like, I didn't know what to feel at that point, but it was just amazing to find that there was somebody out there that was caring for him and thinking about him that doesn't even know him or part of the family. Like, it just was amazing to me. So Yannick will send me photos of Leo's grave, and with flowers and American flag. Also, he did, like, once I got the photo, so once I pretty much was in contact with him, we sent him a copy of the photo, and he was taking photos of the grave with the American flag draped over it. It was just beautiful. Like, it was amazing to see all that together.
I do know about Yannick, and it just amazes me that a person from another country is taking care of my uncle's grave. I was so happy to hear that when Katie told me that and showed me the pictures that he was sending over here, and I knew, I'll probably get teared up. I knew that it would make my mom happy.
Au fil du temps, à force de discuter avec la famille de Léo, on a créé un lien très fort. Léo est devenu comme un membre de notre famille. Il a fait preuve d'un grand courage, d'un immense courage. Je ne sais même pas si moi, à son âge, j'aurais eu le courage de le faire. Il a sacrifié sa jeunesse. Il a laissé sa famille pour nous libérer. Un héros. Un héros. Mon fils, lui aussi parvient d'une tombe d'un autre soldat. Et il m'a dit que le jour où je ne pourrais plus le faire, plus me déplacer ou que je ne serais plus là, il le ferait pour moi et pour sa famille. Et pour Léo. Léo ne sera pas oublié. Il ne sera jamais seul.
Starting touring here in Normandy, I would bring my groups at Pontiac, and when you're exiting Pontiac, there are big panel with a lot of pictures of rangers and their stories. And one of them is Sergeant Geldon. He's part of C Company of the 2nd Ranger Battalion. He died on June 6, 1944 at the age of 23 years old. On the sign you can see that they mentioned that he died on his wedding anniversary. At that time, for me that was not the most impactful part of the story. That was the fact that he was 23, because I was close to that age. But now that I'm married 2 years ago, I'm gonna be very soon married for 3 years. I'm realizing the importance of that detail. Because I've been married for 2 years and I feel that I've got many more years with Jenny. And when I see that, I'm like, he died on his 3rd wedding anniversary. What a tragic day, to be killed in action.
Walter Geldon was my great uncle. Basically, as I was growing up, I always heard about this uncle that was in the war and was killed on D-Day. He was born on the south side of Bethlehem on Ridge Street, which was right up the hill from the Bethlehem Steel. Walter had worked at the Bethlehem Steel prior to going into service. He had 3 other brothers and a sister. He was Polish. I remember he was very proud of his Polish heritage. All the Geldons were extremely fit. They used to work out at the Polish Hall, which was located just down the street from where Walter was born and raised. They would talk often about lifting weights and the progress they were making in their physical regimen. It was easy to picture any of the Geldons going into the Rangers or an elite unit that required more physical fitness. I remember talking to my Uncle Joe, and he told me that when Walter told him that he was going into the Rangers, he said, "What do you want to do that for? That's like a death sentence, or you're crazy," or something to that effect. I do kind of remember a story that Walter was going to try out for the paratroopers, but something made him go to the Rangers, and he did it. He went to the Rangers, and he was one of the original Rangers at Camp Forest. He was there on April 1st when they formed the 2nd Ranger Division, or Battalion.
Hello, Mom. Hello, Pop. Hope this letter finds both of you in the best of health. Well, here I am, a little closer to home, which makes me feel much better. How is everybody at home? Hope all of you are feeling fine. As you all know now, I have asked for a transfer and have joined up with the Rangers. Hope you don't mind me doing so. I like the work a lot, and I will try hard to make myself a little bigger. I was made a PFC on the 2nd day of training, which I think you'll all be proud of. Now, I will hope to be getting more and more stripes as the days go by. Today we had our physical examination, and I had passed everything. I must go back tomorrow and get the results. So, I think I am in now. Mother, please do not worry, because I will take good care of myself and will work hard for more advancement to make all of you proud of me. I guess I will be saying so long with lots of luck, health, and a million kisses for Mother and Father. Your loving son, Walter. P.S. Mother, how is my wife getting along? Is she still the way when I left? She really is a good girl, isn't she? Mom, please take good care of my wife. And Pop, you take Mother to a movie when you don't work. Well, here's a real big kiss for the dearest mother and father in the world that's my Mom and Pop. Take care of yourselves. On June 6, 1944, Charlie Company of the 2nd Ranger Battalion received the crucial mission to neutralize the German strongpoint 74. The first option, if Dog 1 exit was open, was to use that exit and later push west towards Pointe de la Percée and Pointe du Hoc. However, after landing, if they discovered Dog 1 was not open or secure, they were instructed to climb the cliff and continue their progress towards Pointe de la Percée. The young 24-year-old Captain Ralph Goranson would be leading C Company of the 2nd Ranger Battalion in that mission. In fact, the letter from Captain Goranson and talking to Harry Wilder
and the other ranger that I was able to contact by phone was Paul Bison. And they all talked about, they were singing the Walter Happy Anniversary on the way in, and they all remember that. I do know that Walter and Anna were married on June 6th. It would have been 41. I think his brother Joe was already in the service at that time. And a story that I think I remember him saying that he actually had to sneak out from the base that he was on to come to the wedding. But if that happened, I don't know. But that's something that I remember his brother saying, and I can see his brother doing it. But yeah, so they were married on June 6th, and it was a small church in Freemansburg.
Captain Ralph Goranson, C Company, 2nd Ranger Battalion. We were getting really close to the beach now. I knew exactly where we were. I guided my boats to what our bigot maps identified as a fortified house. This was my landmark. We were about 200 yards out now, yet there was no sign of opposition. It looked like the assault may be a pushover. The men on my boat started to sing for Sergeant Walter B. Geldon. June 6th was his 3rd wedding anniversary. Suddenly, enemy fire started coming in from the left and right, no doubt anticipating our exit from the landing crafts. German light and heavy weapons fire picked up and now focused on the exit ramp area. When our ramp went down, Bill Moody, the 1st platoon commander, was the first one off, and he moved to the right to cross the beach. I was to take the center and Sid had the left. This way, we would cross the beach pretty well spread out. Everyone operated instinctively getting across the beach, but going across was like in a dream. Your mind and body were automatic. The youngest member of our boat made it to the cliff before anyone. He had found a niche for shelter and taken out his Bible. As I reached him, he began reading out loud the 21st Psalm. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. It struck me as a strange scene, hearing the words of the psalm as I was seeing my men cross the beach under intense fire coming down on us. I was sick at seeing so many of my men killed, and in such short time. Among them was Sergeant Walter B. Geldon, who sadly died on his wedding anniversary.
I don't know, but I look at pictures of the LCAs and think, my God, can you imagine being on that for the 4 hours that 4 hours or so that they were just waiting before they made the final run into the beach? And I mean, you just look at the seating arrangement, and I just couldn't imagine. Just can't imagine what those guys went through. From what I understand, or from what talking to Harry Wilder and the note that I got from Captain Goranson, LCA 418 was the LCA that they were on, and as they were coming in, they ended up getting hit. It destroyed the landing craft, and but apparently my uncle was able to make it off. He got on the beach, and that's where he was killed. According to Captain Goranson and the men who survived the crossing, half of the company was wiped out by the time they managed to reach the bottom of the cliff. They had trained intensively for months, some of the most challenging physical and mental training exercises the United States Army had to offer. The young soldiers were pushed to their limits for weeks without end to make sure they were ready, only to lose 50% of their men within 10 minutes of landing. However, there was a job to do, and the mission was to reach Pointe de la Parcée and later push towards Pointe du Hoc. Captain Goranson recalled the men on his left were collapsing due to injury or death under the unrelenting hailfire of ammunition from machine guns, mortars, and the anti-tank guns that were surrounding the Vierville draw. Given their heavy losses, in order to complete their mission successfully, a decision had to be made. Instead of going toward Pointe de la Parcée directly, they decided to change plans and take German resistance nest number 73 from behind. By doing so, this group of 30 men from C Company are credited with saving countless lives that day on Omaha Beach.
The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that your husband, Sergeant Walter B. Geldon, was killed in action on June 6, 1944 in France.
What I understand, Anna, his wife, lived with Walter's parents for a little bit. I don't know how long. His brother, I think his brother was over in Italy when he found out, and he didn't take the news too well, and apparently for lack of a better word, made sure that he avenged his brother's death, because I remember him telling me some stories about his feelings when he found out that he was killed. But after, I don't know too much after that, with Anna staying there for a little, his wife staying there for a little bit. I do know that, they never forgot him. My uncle would, every June 6th, would put a memorial on his front lawn. But I know his mother was very distraught for a long time after that, because Walter was her youngest. I know my Uncle Joe, he would put things on the grave all the time. Like he'd make some homemade stuff, and Sergeant Walter B. Geldon killed in action, Omaha Beach, and big placard on the grave. He made like a flag holder for him, and so he definitely wasn't forgotten after he was brought back in '49. My grandfather, Uncle Joe, and Uncle Frank, those were his brothers, and my Aunt Helen, they are all still around. When I did the 60th anniversary memorial service for them, they were all there. And then it wasn't too long after that they all started passing away. So, but yeah, they all got to see it, which is a highlight for me. All I know is that when Anna passed away, she requested that she was buried next to Walter. I did talk to, when Anna remarried, they had a daughter, and I spoke to the daughter, and she said that her mother never forgot. Yeah, that she never forgot him. This is my daughter, Taylor. She came with us today to pay her respects, and she will carry on the tradition of paying respects to Walter and the family after I give up my time on Earth here.
Well, I was born in Canton, Ohio, 1944. That's where my mom came back. She had been in California with him, and then the 743rd had been training for desert warfare, and then they were sent to England. They had to go through New York State and then across to England. So the last time they saw each other was in Los Angeles. And then my mom went home, and then eventually I was born in February 1944. He was born in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, central Pennsylvania. So even though his dad was educated and his high school principal, hunting, deer hunting, and fishing were big parts of their lives. After high school, he went to Lehigh University, which is also in Pennsylvania, and he got his degree there in 4 years. And I think when he was there, he joined ROTC as well. But that was, the war hadn't started yet, so he went out, and as far as I know, this was before he met my mother, he was selling business machines, like for burros, so they would, not computers like today, but tick, 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 But he ended up in Canton, Ohio, and that's where he met my mother. So that was the beginning of the relationship that they had, yeah.
After Ned Elder entered the service, he went down to Fort Knox and began intense training. During this time, he was in constant communication with his soon-to-be wife. After Fort Knox, the 743rd was sent to Fort Lewis, where they were learning tank warfare. It was during his training there that he and Betty decided to get married.
And so my mother came from Ohio on the train all the way out. She had no other, her mother, father, other family couldn't be there. And so she came out by herself. They were married there at Fort Lewis, and then they lived, an on-base life, and he was doing his training. And eventually, they were sent from Fort Lewis, Washington, to the Desert Warfare Training Center down outside Phoenix, in that area, Palm Springs, actually. And so they were there as a married couple and all that. And then while they were there, a movie crew from Hollywood came out, and they were making a movie about tankers. And I don't know if the movie star, who was an American movie star back then, was Wallace Beery. So there's photographs of my dad with him out showing him what a tank's like. So they were in the movies. I mean, there's a picture of my dad showing Wallace Beery how he should point to where they should go with their tank. So, yeah. So they were down in Arizona. They got on the train. They went all the way up to Camp Shanks in New York State, and then from there down to Manhattan. And they got on, I forget the name of the ship, but I have pictures of it. They got on, went over to Scotland, and then eventually got into England. And there they trained, I forget the town, but they started really intensive training then. I mean, it was like nothing that they had before. And it wasn't until later that they were introduced to the amphibious tanks.
On November 1st, 1943, Deputy Commander to the Chief of Staff of the Supreme Allied Commander, General Ray Barker, first broached the idea of the DD tank, the duplex drive system. It had been tested with a series of other systems. However, it faced a formidable challenge in overcoming the weight of the tank. The solution was an inflatable, waterproof screen that could be easily inflated by filling the tubes with compressed air. 15 minutes later, the tank would be waterproof, and it could be deflated in a matter of minutes as well.
By June 1944, the US Army had 3 tank battalions that were going to carry the DD tanks. A total of 96 DD tanks and 32 DD tanks in each battalion. So we have the 70th Tank Battalion in Utah Beach with 32 DD tanks, and then the 741st and the 743rd Tank Battalion, also both with 32 DD tanks, so 64 DD tanks on Omaha Beach.
Well, I haven't seen the orders, but my understanding from everything is they were the first to land, and therefore they were supposed to provide support for the soldiers, the Bedford boys, and all the other people that came in. So once they got on land, they had an artillery piece that was movable. And so in the case of D1, I think the thing they would have wanted to do was blow that open.
So most of the stories that you hear about the DD tanks are the ones of the 741st Tank Battalion that landed on the eastern part of Omaha Beach with the 1st Infantry Division sector. And the reason for that is because they lost 27 out of 32 DD tanks just because of the rough sea that morning on June 6, 1944. The DD tank was not able to swim in the rough sea, and the system proved that it was just not working well. And because of that, they lost 27 tanks and a couple of more by German fire on the beaches. Now that is the overall story, the story that you can read everywhere, and it's almost, and they're saying that the DD tank was a failure. But we also have the 743rd Tank Battalion landing on the western part of Omaha Beach in the 29th Infantry Division sector. And I'm just wondering what did happen to them.
I didn't know the answer to that until later in my life. One day, my dad's brother, Bob Elder, called me up and he said, you should go get Stephen Ambrose's book about D-Day. And I said, why? Because I hadn't really gone into all that stuff at that point. He said, well, there's a couple pages about your dad in there. So I said, oh, okay. So I went and bought that book, and what I found out was the story of the difference between the 741st and the 743rd. And apparently they saw what had happened, and what had happened was the 741st tanks, let's say it's 1,000 yards, they went off the little boats and they just sunk. There was the British, they were in charge of the boats, and then the American tankers were on there, and the American soldiers. So the guy who was in the command of the boats where my dad was, he got on the radio and called my dad, and he said, you know what, these other guys, they all sank. I mean, those are my words, but, and I think my dad said, do you think you can take us all the way in? And the guy said, sure, we'll do it. And that's exactly what they did. They landed all their tanks on the beach. While they were out there on the beach, that's when my dad was wounded. He was out of his tank, he was the commander, and he was telling guys where to go. I mean, that's my understanding, or where not to go. And picking targets for them, and he was wounded then. And but he refused, and he didn't want to be taken off someplace to be cared for. So that's where he earned his Distinguished Service Cross for the actions that day, where he stayed out on the beach and directed the fire from the tanks that were surviving, even though he had been wounded. Where the next big goal was go to St. Lo. I don't know if that's the best pronunciation, but so it was there up in the hedgerows, and on July 11th that he was shot and killed. I think my mom just shut down. She had her own mother to take care of. That's another part of my family history, is I'm pretty sure my grandmother had a massive stroke on Pearl Harbor Day. So the family seems to have been affected by the war, but nobody ever talked about it. One day, I came home from school and she was down in the basement crying. And I think there was a whole bunch of letters there, but it was just, there was never any discussion about my father. And again, I'm not angry about that, but that was her way of processing that, I guess. So after I retired and I had more free time, and I found out about this place, and of course I knew the story about my father, but this coming down here helped me put it all together in a more comprehensive way, and it's helped me sort of honor my father, who I never met, by coming down here. So it's, I enjoy it. I've done some special tours, and I'll talk a lot more about my dad then, but just for the, day in, day out tour, I mean, everybody's got their own roadmap of how they go around. Every tour group I'm on is at the Gold Star Memorial, and there's a brick for my father. So it gets talked about then.
When the monument was being designed and built, the idea was we should have the names of those who died on June 6, 1944. The problem was at the time that nobody knew how many died on June the 6th. The research had never been done. And so it would take 20+ years of research and dedication by memorial staff to really determine who died on June 6, 1944. Many said it could not be done We did it, and we're still doing it, because it's really a project, quite honestly, that will always be going on as we continue to discover names of those that we can verify died on June the 6th. But we're very proud of the fact that our necrology wall lists by name by name, every single soldier, sailor, airman, Coast Guardsman who died on June 6, 1944. And not just the American names, the Allied names as well. This is, I think, significant research in the realm of D-Day history, and that's something we needed to do, because we don't want to just talk about numbers, those who died on that day. 4,415 died just on June the 6th alone. But you want to see their names. Who were they? Who were these young men who made the ultimate sacrifice? We want to be able to walk up to that wall and touch those names and really experience and get to know more of their stories. And I think that, to me, is one of the most moving things here at the memorial. So right here we see John B. Skank, who was part of Company A, and he was a staff sergeant. And he also was killed on June 6, 1944, with so many of the others out of Company A. Many years ago, I interviewed his then wife, Evelyn, and it was one of those interviews you never really forget, because she was still so emotional all those years later, thinking of her husband. And of course, they wrote to one another faithfully every single night. They had a certain time that they would stop what they were doing and think about one another and write letters. And so heartbreaking to read so many of those letters. And still, she cried telling me the story of when she found out about his death, and just how devastating that was to her. I don't think she ever got over John's death, and though she did marry, she never forgot him.
This is the last letter that Evelyn wrote to John on June 25th, 1944. She did not know that he had been killed on D-Day and was already temporarily buried over there. She received the letter back deceased on July 17th, the same day the telegrams came into Bedford. In the letter, she is telling John how much she loved him and how anxious she was for him to come home, because it was now 2 years since they had been married.
John, my darling. Well, it has been nearly 22 months since we were married. It has seemed very long and yet unbelievably short in duration. The only constant thing about it is that I continue to love and appreciate you more and more each day. The fact that I have you to live for, work for, has made these last 2 years the happiest, most satisfying of my life. Do you realize that 2 years ago we were just beginning to talk about getting married? Can't help remembering how I used to fear you were stringing me along. Gosh, how it thrills me to realize that soon you'll be coming back home, and we will be together for the rest of our lives. I have a feeling that I shall never unwillingly leave you for a whole day when you do come home. Seems to me we've been separated for enough time to last a couple hundred years. Darling, we're hoping and praying for your safety and welfare. I need and want you terribly. Your loving wife, Evelyn.
This is Little Jack Reynolds' grave. He was the company runner. He was a message man, and you know, most of the radios were lost on D-Day. They were totally ineffective, and so runners were very important. And Jack was better known as Little Jack, was the company runner. He was only 5'6", he was quick. He could cover a lot of ground quickly, and he was killed almost immediately within the first few minutes of landing on Omaha Beach. Most graves after a number of years can, if they're untouched, they're going to be unreadable. And these gravestones should always be able to be read. once the wood starts getting old and ugly, and a lot of times I'll come and try to readjust the flag. The flag's still in decent shape, but a lot of times they'll just break off. So if they break off that easy, then you know the wind's going to break them. So make sure they have good flag here to honor the grave. You know, it's been said that people die twice. The first time is the death that we're all familiar with, and the second one is when the last person who knows you dies. We always want to make sure that people through the centuries from now on are going to know who they were. They died a pretty tough death the first time, so we should always remember that.